I'm Nafysa Adam, a Principal Associate at Anjawala and Kana Advocates. I'll be taking you through part 2 of Islamic Finance Training. Now, my colleague Sahil has already taken you through part 1 of the training, which was an introductory bit of Islamic finance and touched on the types of Islamic finance products and contracts. I'll be taking you today through one such type of contract known as Murabaha. Murabaha is a type of Islamic finance that is derived from an Arabic word known as ribh, which means profit or gain derived from trade. As its origin, it started as a kind of sell or trade and not as an Islamic finance product, and with time it evolved to be an Islamic finance product. Generally, it entails the purchase of a commodity at a known cost and the resale of the commodity to the customer at a cost plus a profit markup. Islamic financing prohibits the charging of interest on money, and hence Murabaha being a very lucrative product in Islamic financing because it permits the charging of fixed profit on the sale of goods. So in Murabaha, you generally have the supplier on the one hand of the chain, you have the bank in the middle, and you have the customer right at the end. So you have the bank procuring the purchase of the goods from the supplier at a cost which is known to both the bank and the customer, and the bank selling the goods to the customer at a price that is known and a profit markup that is also known to the customer. So what is so different in a Murabaha transaction if you compare it with conventional financing? Firstly, it is generally because a bank trades in the commodity. So a bank has to source the good, has to actually trade in the good and then sell the good to a customer. In conventional financing, the bank does not concern itself with trading. The customer is the one that normally sources the goods and only comes to the bank for money. And hence you see how interest is just charged on the money element. Let's look at briefly the considerations in a Murabaha transaction. We have title and possession of goods must pass from the seller to the bank. In addition, we have what is known as additional security or hamish jidya, which is generally a security that a bank would require to cushion itself in the event that the customer does not proceed with the transaction. So a bank could demand an irrevocable deposit from the customer. The property and risk in the goods passes to the customer simultaneously at the offer and acceptance of the goods. And you understand how this is so because a Murabaha in itself is a trade, and hence all rules of contract apply to it. Additionally, a bank could also require the customer to take insurance on the goods, and one can understand this because of the risk element involved in title and possession of goods, and also the bank wanting to cushion itself from any unwanted damage of the goods. So we have already explained that Murabaha in itself is a trade, and hence all rules of contract would apply to a Murabaha financing. So for instance, the subject of the sale must exist at the point that a Murabaha transaction is entered into. The subject matter must be in the ownership of the seller, and as such, any conditional ownership is not permitted. An obvious rule would be that the Murabaha transaction cannot be used to fund any un-Islamic purpose, and my colleague has previously touched on un-Islamic trade that is not allowed. The subject matter of the property must be having value, so you can see how money in itself is not something with value under Islamic financing, and hence the prohibition of charging of interest on it. There must be certainty of price, i.e. the cost of the product and the profit markup must be known right at the beginning. And for this reason, any renegotiation of the price is not allowed. Additionally, any rollover of Murabaha is not permitted, and it can only be used for that fixed purchase of a commodity. And once that commodity is acquired, the murabaha transaction is extinguished once the bank is paid. We'll now briefly look at the stages in a murabaha transaction. And we have explained that there is the first part, which is the acquisition of the assets by the bank, and then the second part, which is the sale of the assets to the customer. So how does this happen practically? Practically, a bank does not have the time or the resources to be the entity that sources for the goods. The only logical conclusion would be that the bank appoints the customer as its agent to source the goods for it. How it works in terms of documentation is that the bank has what is known as a master agreement that it signs with the customer. This agreement is known as a master murabaha facility agreement and sets out all the terms of the trade and the murabaha transaction between the customer and the bank. What happens first? We have the bank receiving what is known as a written request from the customer, in which the customer actually requests the bank to source or assist it in financing of certain goods. These goods are normally attached in a schedule to the written request. And additionally, the bank would also require what is known as a promissory note to cushion itself further in the event that the customer does not proceed to purchase. The bank then proceeds to enter into an agency agreement with the customer, where the customer is appointed as the sole agent to source for the goods already identified in the written request. Thereafter, we have a declaration by the agent confirming that they have already sourced for the goods for which they were appointed, and they have already indicated the cost price for the goods. Simultaneously, we have a second process where the customer offers to purchase the goods from the bank, and these are the same goods already listed in the declaration by the agent. And simultaneously, we have an acceptance by the bank, and this seals the murabaha transaction itself. So thereafter, the bank just proceeds to pay the supplier for the goods, and the bank then receives the payment from the customer, which can be deferred payments in agreed installments, or it can be a one lump sum payment, again at an agreed period of time based on the terms of the master musharaka agreement. So one would ask where a murabaha transaction is generally used, and there are so many uses for it. We can use a murabaha financing trade in working capital needs, where a company needs to purchase raw materials. We can also use a murabaha product for a trade finance, import finance, asset finance, vehicle and housing finance. And murabaha transactions can also be used under letters of credit, where, and this is generally the case in import financing. We'll look at very briefly the basic mistakes in murabaha financing, and one of it is the assumption that it can be used for all types of transactions. This is not the case. Murabaha is generally not used in perishable goods, so cannot be used to fund milk and other perishable items. The other mistake is that it is the assumption that it can be used even before the product is acquired from a seller or a supplier. So this is not the case. The supplier must be in possession of the good before the bank proceeds to commit itself to purchase it. And then it can also not be used for already purchased commodities, in the sense of having a sham of a murabaha transaction where a customer has already been funded and is now seeking to ratify it by doing a post-murabaha transaction. That is all with regards to murabaha financing. I hope you've learned a few tips about murabaha financing. Thank you.